Happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Path to 1 Million. This is episode 86. We're moving right along. I'm kind of excited about that. So I want to tell you something. Yesterday, especially in the afternoon, I found myself in a bit of a funk. Actually, a bit of a funk would not be an accurate term. It was more like a lot of funk that's going on. So let's take a trip back in time so I can kind of bring you guys up to speed as to what has been happening. So back in June, I undertook a large project that was just simply designed to just more or less, in the grand scheme of things, move me away from pain and take me closer to pleasure. And part of that involves getting a lot of work done on my house and moving my house project forward. So, obviously this means that I have to start dealing with contractors and I have to line up financing and figure out what needs to be done. What do I need to do to, get this ball moving forward? And part of that process, of course, involves getting people to actually give me quotes so I can hold them accountable for the amount of money that's being spent and being charged. There's no way on the planet I would ever allow any contractor to just come in and start work without knowing the scope of what it is that they're going to do and how much it's going to cost. And there's a lot of little things, a lot of repairs around the house that need to be completed and done. And I want to make sure that everything was documented to make sure that the entire process was completed and that not only that, but I was going to get what I paid for out of that process. And of course, as we're doing this, the entire process seemed to take pretty close to 6 weeks. It was actually yesterday where we finally made it to a point where he could sign off on a scope of work. But during this entire time, because he's a general contractor, we have to work with all of these other subcontractors that he deals with. So he's got a guy, for instance, that does electricity. He's got another guy who does roofing. He's got another guy who does plumbing. He's got another guy who does general handyman. So not only am I trying to coordinate with the general contractor, the GC, I am also trying to contract with all of these subcontractors and getting them out, getting them quotes. Now, I've actually renovated houses before, and I'm not doing a full renovation on my place now, but I've renovated houses before where I've had to deal with contractors. And quite honestly, this is a world that completely confuses me. I think if you're a contractor out there, you actually have your act together and you actually do what you say you're going to do when you're going to do it, I don't see any reason on the planet why you guys wouldn't all be millionaires, because the hardest thing on the planet is to get people to show up and to give you a quote. And for some reason they disappear in the middle of the day and they don't return texts and calls. And so this whole world confuses me. I think if you just had an act together, run across one contractor that had an act together, like I said, you would be an absolute millionaire. So the process of getting people to come out and give me a quote and walk them around and show them what I want and what needs to be done and show them reports and everything else that I had performed on the house, finally got all of that together, finally got people to show up, started getting quotes, finally got the general contractor to agree to sign off on the scope of work. And I really thought for sure that today would be the day that we could go ahead and start lining up all this work and get everybody in and get them to start doing things. But lo and behold, yesterday afternoon, there was a wrinkle. There's some kind of an application now that has to be filled out. I didn't know anything about this before. But long story short, I was just sitting there on my couch yesterday, I was just in a funk because now this is just one more thing I have to fight. I wish I had known about, this process weeks ago, because then I could have actually started getting the GC and helping him collect all the information that he needed weeks ago so we could be deep within all the repairs that are going on to the house. But instead, there's just one more step, and every single time there's one more step, there's just another delay in this process. And truth be told, yesterday I was in a really, I was just in a funk place. I was just sitting there, and I just remember I was by myself in my house. I had the TV playing, but I don't even remember what was on TV because I just kept going through my head about all the problems, all the challenges. There's another delay that's coming up here. It doesn't feel like I'm getting any closer. I mean, you could do all the paperwork you want, but for me, it's when I actually start seeing people work and doing things, do I actually feel like something's getting accomplished, something's getting done. I go through this entire process, and now I'm sitting there on my couch, and I'm kind of going down the rabbit hole, thinking about all of these things. And truth be told, all of them are negative things. There's nothing positive about, being grateful because your project is delayed. Actually, it's the counterpoint to that. It's just one thing after another. It's like, well, are there any other surprises that are coming down? What are the excuses that I'm going to get this time for not getting this done? How much of a delay is it going to be? And how hard is it going to get paperwork? And if there's anything that I can do to move the process forward, right? And sometimes I get trapped in these rabbit holes and I keep going down them, and it actually starts to impact the people that are around me if I stay in that funk. And since I've been on this path of self-awareness, right, trying to understand why it is that I think that I do, why is it that I do what I do, I've quickly realized that in here I was like, okay, I need to take a step back. I need to detach myself from the situation and just ask the simple question, why am I in this funk, right? Why am I feeling this way? And this was like later on last night as I was sitting here watching TV. And the one thing that did occur to me as I was going through this process of self-analyzation was once again, because the book is fresh in my brain, I was reading Girl, Don't Wash Your Face by Rachel Hollis. And she wrote something in this chapter that I thought was like really compelling. And it was something that came back to my mind last night as I was sitting there. And she writes in there, don't tell me that you don't have it in you to want something more for your life. Don't tell me you have to give it up because it's difficult. This is life or death too. There's a difference between living a life you've always dreamed of versus sitting alongside the death of the person that you were meant to become. You've got to do something about it. You have to reach down inside yourself and remember the reason why you started this. You better find a way to keep going, because if you don't, I promise you, someone else will. And if that happens, you will watch someone else achieve your dreams, enjoy your spoils of the hard-fought battle. And if that happens, you will understand one of the greatest lessons in life. The only thing worse than giving up is wishing that you hadn't, which is absolutely true. And I remember thinking to myself about that last night, and I thought, man, how dumb am I? Like, really, I mean, that's like step one of the entire process. Whenever I get into a side of a funk, I have to remind myself of exactly the reason why that I'm doing this in the first place. I'm not doing this just for shits and giggles. I'm doing this because I want to move my life forward. In other words, there's usually inside a human life, according to Tony Robbins, there are 2 points that people operate from. They either operate to get away from pain, or they operate to get closer to pleasure. So for me, this is about alleviating some of the pain that is in my life and getting me closer to some of the pleasure that is in my life. And that is a process, and this is a change process. And I have to remind myself of that, like, hey, what is the bigger picture here? If you're completely surrounded by roses in a field, sometimes it's completely easy to get distracted by the fact that there's a thorn in that field, rather than take into account that there's all these roses that are surrounding you. So the first thing I have to do whenever I get inside of a funk, the first thing I have to do is just remind myself, why am I doing this in the first place? Usually when I remind myself of that end goal, like I said, it's usually pain or pleasure. It brings everything into perspective. And suddenly all these big problems that are in front of me just seem to melt away. They just become nothing more than items that are on my checklist. The second thing that I have to remind myself of all the time, whenever I'm dealing with these problems or these issues, moving forward, either moving away from pain or moving towards pleasure, I have to remind myself that there are people out there who would kill to have my problems. They would easily give up their right arm to have my problems. I mean, there are people out there that, are facing eviction or are living in their cars or are homeless or whatever it is like that. So for me to sit there and say, wow, I don't think I can move forward with these problems, it almost seems to me to be absolutely ludicrous. Like I said, just remembering that there are people out there who would kill to have my problems just kind of puts that whole thing into perspective. And for me, it gives me that second tool that I need to say, you know what? I can't allow myself to remain in this funk. I got to get out of this funk. I have to see it for what it is. It's just something that's temporary, because my longer term goal is designed to do one thing, and that is obviously to bring me pleasure. And I just have to keep that in mind. I have to keep that in perspective as I am moving forward. So, today it's right back in it. It's right back into slugging it out. I've already got phone calls lined up, and I've already got one meeting lined up to, keep the ball moving forward. And the good news is that when I go into those meetings, I'm not going to be in a funk. I'm not going to be approaching it as an adversarial attitude. That's really not my point. My point is what do we need to do to move this forward? What can I do to get this to move forward? And more importantly, what can they do to make this move forward as well? So anyways, I just wanted to share those thoughts with you on this Monday. Some of the things that's been rattling around in my head over the past 24 hours. I hope you guys all have a fantastic Monday, and I will be back again tomorrow with another story. I'll see you then. Have a good day.